I do appreciate being here. Thank you for the chance to talk to you today a little bit about what's going on in Washington. We're going to talk a little bit about tax reform. I have 50 slides back at the office on tax reform, and seriously, if you want deep dives on any of the topics I have here today, please get back to the sponsors of our luncheon, and we'll gladly do that. I would be remiss before I begin without introducing my partner and wingman up here in Detroit, Reggie Turner, who is with us today. Reggie, thank you for all you do for this community. So you might ask, okay, so I'm a lobbyist from Washington, right? And I'm a lawyer. I went to law school at night when I worked in the Senate. And you might ask, why would you have somebody like this come up and talk to you about tax reform, about what's going on in Washington? And I will tell you, I started in Washington as a Capuchin Franciscan brother. I was in the seminary, and I left to go and work on Capitol Hill. Long story on that one. But I ended up, after 18 months, going to work for a feisty congresswoman from Baltimore named Barbara Mikulski. She came to fame by stopping a highway from a cloverleaf from going through the city of Baltimore that would have destroyed the west side of Baltimore, which was heavily African-American home ownership, and the east side of Baltimore, which was ethnic neighborhoods. And because she stopped that road, that's what today's Inner Harbor is built upon. The cloverleaf that the Department of Transportation wanted to put in downtown Baltimore is today the Inner Harbor, which was the signature Renaissance piece of economic development for that city. So going to work for the senator, the congresswoman, and then we helped her get elected to the Senate, and she got on the Appropriations Committee. And after a very short period of time, she became head of this big subcommittee through a whole quirk of good luck, good fortune, and Senate rules for governing such things that oversaw a whole series of federal agencies. And you're wondering, well, where am I going with this? Well, one of those agencies was NASA, the space program. So 6 years after the seminary, I'm overseeing the NASA budget for Senator Mikulski, among other things. And if you look at that community, and it reflects our practice today at Clark Hill, I'm proud to say, it is a community that is rich in the number of people of color and diversity in the community of contractors they built. And if you go to the Maryland Space Business Roundtable, which is roughly 60 companies that all do work in and around the Goddard Space Flight Center, which is about 10 or 12 miles northeast of Washington, D.C., and you go to one of those luncheons, it's incredibly diverse. And I'm proud to say that many of those companies are our clients today at Clark Hill. We have a client, I was just telling folks, that was started by a fellow who came to this country. He's the same age as me. I won't tell you how old he is, but he came to this country at the age of 18 from Iran. And he put himself through college, parking cars at the University Club in Washington, put himself through Catholic University, went on to get his PhD, and he ended up working at Lockheed Martin. And his office mate was a fellow named Harold Stinger. This guy's name was Cam Gaffarian. Harold Stinger was his office mate. Harold had a side job. He's the pastor of an African-American Baptist congregation in Leesburg, Virginia, 700 families out there in his congregation. They started this company in 1994. When I joined them as their outside help in 2003, they were $30 million a year in revenue and about 500 employees. 2 weeks ago, they sold their company to a publicly traded company for $400 million, about 16 times earnings, and they were up to $600 million in revenue per year. That's all government contracting, heavily NASA, but some defense, some NOAA. And I'm telling you, there are companies like that that we work for, and we know how tough it is in that community to build, as entrepreneurs, how tough it is and how hard it is to build, and how you look for workforce and so forth. And so I want to tell you that that's why I feel so strongly about coming to Detroit and talking to a community like this, because it really does matter. This first slide this is our commercial about Clark Hill. So you can read that on your own. I'm sure the slides will be available. But we help people get things done in Washington, whether it's with the executive branch or the legislative branch, or we go to court from sometimes. We joke around the boardroom, the courtroom, the cloakroom, whatever is the venue. And that's how you really need to think about when you tackle contracting issues with the federal government, how to do it. That's our broad experience, and we do have, a lot of interest there. So Washington today, right? So you read the headlines and so forth, and you can see we are, and what I would point out to you is we are in an incredibly disruptive period. You know this better than anybody in the country. Now, I'm from Western Pennsylvania. I grew up in a little steel town. So I can tell you, you all know manufacturing has struggled since the 1970s when it contracted and the number of people that are there. The service economy has become the central element for job growth. And if you look at the job growth in this country, and we have a client in the financial services space that's doing a quality jobs initiative from some proceeds of a court settlement that they got during the financial crisis, and they went out and did a whole series of town hall hearings on the West Coast, and you look and say, what's the #1 job growth over the next 20 years? Home health care aides, because of the aging population. It's a service-driven economy, was what economists are projecting. And you look at this whole thing, we know this now from Facebook and all the rest of it, with cybersecurity, we hear about that, the data, right, information, people's information is the new oil. Even looking at the automotive industry, and you look at the new rage in autonomous vehicles and all the electronics that go into that, what is the strategy in that whole industry? It's to bring the artificial intelligence community from Silicon Valley to partner with the automotive industry here in Michigan to drive a resurgence there. And that's also not only just on the commercial side with automotive vehicles, but also out at TACOM, because, Michigan, as we all know, is, one of the pillars of the arsenal of democracy because of the compatibility between aerospace and the commercial auto industry, and particularly with ground platforms that you all know well about out in Warren. So the point is that in the last part of this slide, which is important, is how much disruption is going on culturally, and there's an incredible amount of blame and finger pointing that goes on in this whole thing. And, frankly, there's a big push with the new administration to shift funding priorities, shifting from east to west, right, further out into the middle of the country, and that's a big priority there. And yet, despite the turmoil, there are some things we agree on, right, as a country. 50% of Democrats and 54% of Republicans wear jeans to work 4 days a week. I didn't know that. Somebody dug up that statistic for me. But now I'll let you pick which one of the Republican genes and which one of the Democrats. I'm not sure I can compare, and it probably varies by age, I would assume, so for an old guy like myself. One of the things that everybody said at the front end of this Congress was we need to do something about tax reform, and there were different and competing priorities, and I know that's one of the things we want to talk about today, but unfortunately, they couldn't reach a consensus that was a bipartisan. But they did pass a bill, and they surprised a lot of people in doing it because the Republicans were very focused, singularly focused, on trying to get this thing through. And there are some pluses and minuses in it depending upon your point of view. But if you're a corporation, and this includes small businesses, you can see there was a big problem prior to the passage of this act, that we were at the beginning. We were at the very top of all the developed countries in the world. This is the list of all of the OECD countries around the world. They would be our competitors that would be reflected in some of the analysis that was done about the auto industry and NAFTA. And you can see that after tax reform, there was a big reduction, and going from 35% to 21%. And that's the big hallmark of this bill. That's a permanent reduction, a corporate tax reduction, as opposed to the reductions in the individual income tax rates, which all sunset after 2025. And so that's just the way the scorekeeping did. But that is the big take-home message for business in this. There are all kinds of other smaller rules that apply. Whoops. I don't know what happened there. And if you ask small business owners, the trend line has been changing since this act passed in January, or December rather, and you see everybody was very enthusiastic that it will stimulate a lot of economic growth. But you can see the polling data with small businesses at least, which was very high at the beginning, that it would help all of them. The sentiment now that we get 4 or 5 or 6 months past that, it's uncertain as to whether or not, frankly, it's going to create the kind of economic growth. And it's too soon to tell. I suspect. But, you'll see that there is some change in that. For small businesses, the other thing that's in this bill that was a very targeted, disciplined thing was to do for pass-through entities. So they'd be privately held corporations largely that are pass-through entities where the owner is the key executive. It's a pass-through. That there is a credit. It sunsets after 5 years, but there is a credit of 20% on qualified business income, and there's certain conditions for it. But that's a deliberate tip of the hat to small businesses and pass-through entities about trying to give them some relief. And it's whether it pays off in the way that folks want, because, and again, what they've done in lowering the corporate rate was eliminate a lot of the deductions that were out there for most of the standard activities for both individuals and corporations. They lowered it to create some level of simplification. Now, there is one thing that you want to note that's in the tax bill, and they called opportunity zones. And under certain conditions, eligible communities are allowed, and there's employers of all sizes get some extra credit for actually investing in these particular zones. Now, we've done these over the years. We've called them different things. They were called empowerment zones. They've been called other kinds of things over the years, if you go way back into the Reagan administration, the Reagan and Bush administrations. But they're set up for you to invest in a particular community, and you can get eligibility and get some actual extra benefits that go from that. And where we are in the process, so you might say, okay, the bill passed, it's all done. Well, that's actually not completely accurate, because what's happening now is that there's a whole set of implementation phases on this thing. So while the bill gets passed, then they have to implement by regulation, and so there is a whole drafting process that goes on inside of the executive branch. Then they propose a rulemaking, and then there is, a set of temporary regulations, and then at each step of the way, you try and influence those with public comments or people to come up and help try and do the interpretation. And then ultimately, then the Department of the Treasury makes the decision on that. And so, this is going to play out for the next year or so in terms of the implementation of this bill, because it's broad and it's sweeping, and it will go on. So, the question is, what does the future hold for all of us here? And, there's a lot of uncertainty going on in Washington even now. So we passed a big appropriations bill at the end of last year, or a few months ago, that was the whole budget for the coming year. And yet the president, after making an agreement, he's actually coming up, and this will impact some of the programs that go on in this state. He's trying to actually push for a rescission of a certain amount. Now, the Congress, because it is an election year, is unlikely to do it. And I think that's one of the things that you need to know, that while you're hearing a lot about these extra budget cuts, I don't think they're actually going to go forward. But what's the big enchilada, which was referred to in the whole discussion on NAFTA, and that's the midterm elections. And you can see that there is a big focus on the economy across all folks. And that's, I think, what's going to still be a major bearing on what's going on. And you see this with respect to the way people are going to make decisions going forward in terms of their votes going forward. And then you look at the budget, and I say this to you as a community, as a business community here in Michigan, to look at where the investments are made in the federal government, because I think by looking at that, there are contracting opportunities, there are investment opportunities for research and other particular things at almost every step of the way. And I want you to know that, to look at that, and you can see defense is obviously the biggest thing, but as you see on the bottom part of the curve there, Medicare and Medicaid are going to be the two big drivers of our budget going forward, and you're going to continually hear about this with health care. Okay, they didn't repeal Obamacare, they made some nicks in it, they repealed the individual mandate, but you're going to see a continuing focus on that, because it's roughly today $1 of every $3 in the federal government goes for health care. And if you look at spending as the baby boomer generation gets older, the number of people that are going to require long-term care and long-term assistance as they age in place and live longer, which is a good thing, is going to become more acute. And so this issue is not going away in terms of what we'll be dealing with in Washington. So it's a complicated period, it's a disruptive period, and there's a lot of polarization. What I would say to you is that there are still, despite that, the federal government's open for business, and I think there's lots of opportunity for folks if they choose to seek it. Thank you.